Lama, and that the successor for the current Dalai Lama will be chosen by what is called the Garden Phodrang Trust. It's a trust that is run by the office of the Dalai Lama. It has people that's been nominated by him, including famous Hollywood actor Richard Gere. What this does is two things. One, now there is certainty that there will be a 15th Dalai Lama, so that the continuation of the lineage, the continuation of the supreme faith for the Tibetan people, or the person who embodied or personified the faith for the Tibetan people, that lineage continues. But it also appends the manner in which a Dalai Lama has been chosen all along. But the most important could be a reason that is not so spiritual or religious. It is the most important reason, which is geopolitical, because this will rob China and the Chinese Communist Party of any legitimacy if they try to name a Communist Party approved Tibetan spiritual leader, much like what they did with the Panchen Lama a few years ago. That Panchen Lama reportedly even met with Xi Jinping a few weeks ago, but he has no recognition, he has no following, he simply has no credibility in the eyes of a large majority of the Tibetan people, both who are living in Tibet right now and those who are in exile. So has the Dalai Lama's announcement today that yes, there will be a successor, a 15th Dalai Lama will be chosen and will be chosen by this trust which he has founded, has that taken away the wind out of China's sail?
Dalai Lama 가서 다 연시사디 지 지주기 미 로마즈 지미기 다네 다디 영시 고도스네 타셔요나 대다가 타셔셔로다 아니 경호군이 나름 문제 제조 대 자동가만 나서신 영시 문제기 제거 경구소 Dalai Lama Lodang Condemn Yiji Gewe Yiji Geze Wang Den Genzin Namda Yobadang Kongzu Pengju Nangden Chugyu Hage Uchi Lashen Nambadang Gyawang Kunji Narim Dang Luda Chishin Robe.
Now, unlike presidents or popes, the Dalai Lama is not appointed, he's not elected. He's believed to be reincarnated, and his consciousness is reborn into a new child's body. Now, this is not just a symbolic thing or a metaphorical thing. It's an actual ancient ritual that is filled with spiritual journey that could take even years. In fact, after the current Dalai Lama passes away, the sacred process of identifying his reincarnation begins with what is called the interpretation of omens, dreams, and celestial signs by senior monks. They sit in a monastery, sometimes for days, if not months, and they read these celestial signs. There's a combination of astronomy, astrology, and of course, ultimately, they have to also pick up signs that they read in a celestial fashion. Guided by these visions, as well as ancient prophecies, the Garden Phodrang Trust, which today was declared as the sole authority that will decide who is going to be the next Dalai Lama. This trust will dispatch a search party to locate the child who is believed to embody the Dalai Lama's spirit. Once a potential candidate is found, the child undergoes spiritual testing, like identifying personal artifacts from the previous Dalai Lama's life. This is followed by a close evaluation of the child's behavior, instincts, and wisdom. If all the stars align, if all the signs align, the celestial signs align, then the senior lamas offer what is called the final recognition, and the child then begins years of spiritual training to step into the role of the next Tibetan supreme spiritual leader. But here's where the complication is. The last time the Panchen Lama passed away and the Tibetans had to choose a Panchen Lama, the Tibetan government in exile, the Dalai Lama, chose a Panchen Lama, but the Chinese government went ahead and chose their own person as the next Panchen Lama. The original Panchen Lama, who was chosen by the Dalai Lama and by the Tibetan faithful, that person went missing and has not been seen ever since. So, in keeping with that, China is not very happy with the declaration that was made by the Dalai Lama today. China has said that it has the sole claim over the succession of who is going to be the next Dalai Lama. Beijing, and the foreign ministry spokesperson today there said the Dalai Lama's successor must be selected through what is called the Qing dynasty golden urn method within Chinese territory, and that it must be approved by Beijing. Beijing regards the current Dalai Lama as a separatist or a splittist. That's the word that they've used. They also see control over his succession as critical in managing Tibetan nationalism. The Chinese law mandates that the reincarnated lamas must be approved by the state. Control over the institution of the Dalai Lama would allow Beijing to dilute both the spiritual and the political influence of the Tibetan diaspora, particularly those Tibetans who are living in exile here in India and, in fact, in many other parts of the world.
The Chinese government implements a policy of freedom of religious belief and has issued regulations on religious affairs and the management of the reincarnation of living Buddhas in Tibetan Buddhism, protecting this way of succession in accordance with the law. The reincarnation of the Dalai Lama must adhere to the principle of domestic search, golden urn draw, and approval by the central government, and be handled in accordance with religious rituals, historical customs, and national laws and regulations.
So Lobsang Sangye is the former president of the Central Tibetan Administration, the former Prime Minister of Tibet in exile. Thank you very much, Mr. Sangye, for speaking with us. His Holiness the Dalai Lama has declared that his successor will be chosen by this Gaden Padrong Trust, a trust that's appointed by him. It composes of people who are part of the office of the Dalai Lama, who are close to him. How does this decision impact and what has been the response in the Tibetan community once His Holiness made the announcement earlier today, this morning?
This is a very big and positive news for Tibetan inside and outside Tibet, because there is a clarity in the statement issued by His Holiness Dalai Lama that his reincarnation will continue, institution of Dalai Lama will continue, and his office, Ganden Podhang, which is registered in India, that's why it's called trust. Otherwise, this is like more than 400 years old institution of Dalai Lama called Ganden Podhang. So this is a big news, and we welcome it with big heart, thinking that the institution of Dalai Lama will continue.
But you must have seen, Mr. Sangye, the Chinese government, the Chinese Communist Party is taking grave exception to this. You must have heard the spokesperson of the Foreign Ministry in Beijing today say that this whole process of choosing the next Dalai Lama, the reincarnation, the golden urn, etc., this whole process has to happen within the territory of China, and it has to be approved by the Chinese state, and therefore they claim that this whole process has been appended. How would you respond to that charge by the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson?
I think they have no credibility whatsoever, because the statement says that the Dalai Lama has to be chosen as per the laws of the Chinese government or China, right? But actually, if you look at the laws from 1949 to 1990. There were no laws whatsoever regarding the reincarnation. Now, when Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to His Holiness Dalai Lama, and when Panchen Lama died, they thought, oh, we need a law. And then in 1995, they came out with the regulation. And in 2007, they came with Order Number 5, which essentially issues certificate for reincarnated lamas at the national, provincial, or the local level. But that process also was accused and criticized by senior-most Communist Party member, a Tibetan in China, saying there is so much corruption that the certificate is issued as per the bribery given to Communist Party officials in China. So the law has no validity. The procedure they have put in place is so corrupt, and then it's been questioned even by Communist Party member in China and in Tibet.
So, just like you referred to the case of the Panchen Lama, when the last Panchen Lama died and the Tibetan government in exile, the Dalai Lama chose who's going to be the next Panchen Lama, but that person was then, kidnapped or taken away by the Chinese state, and no one has ever since seen him or heard from him. And instead, the state in Beijing ordered their own Panchen Lama. They reinstated their own Panchen Lama. And I believe this person even met with Xi Jinping a few weeks ago. Even in the case of the appointment of the next Dalai Lama, will that not be contested? Will there not be two Dalai Lamas effectively? and as a result of which, you know, this whole legacy, this whole lineage, this whole succession will be a contested affair.
Sure, a Chinese government will try, you know, so Chinese President Xi Jinping met with, Chinese Panchen Lama or the fake Panchen Lama, you know, because the real Panchen Lama has disappeared for last 30 years and is being kidnapped and no one knows where he is. He is the real Panchen Lama, right? So they will try, but then, you know, it's a matter of spirituality. Religion is a matter of hearts and minds. You can't force religion and spirituality on anyone, far less a leader, right? So Chinese government has zero credibility when it comes to reincarnation process. Even His Holiness Dalai Lama himself has said that if you really want to find my reincarnation, then first you should go and find the reincarnation of Mao Zedong, Zhou Enlai, and Deng Xiaoping. They have been, you know, leaders of China. Then come, you know, and talk about our reincarnation. So they have destroyed Tibetan monasteries and nunneries. They have disrobed monks and nuns. Even today, they continue to curtail religious freedom in Tibet. And throughout his life, Dalai Lama was criticized, like calling him wolves in sheep clothing, you know, head of a snake, and separatists and splitters and all that. What is your reason? What is your basis that you want to select the next Dalai Lama that you have hated and criticized throughout his life?
Mr. Lobsang Sangay, former president of the Tibetan Autonomous Council and also, of course, the former Prime Minister in exile of the Tibetan government in exile. Thank you very much for joining us. I want to move on quickly to the other big story that we're tracking on Brass Tacks. The government today has started implementing across Delhi and the National Capital Region a new law that will not deliver petrol to 15-year-old cars or diesel to 10-year-old cars. Instead, these cars, if they are found at petrol pumps where they've come to be filled with petrol or diesel, they will be immediately taken away and impounded. Now, while this is a rule that's been brought forth by the Air Quality Monitoring Committee, which of course is under the provisions of the Supreme Court and a ruling held up by the Supreme Court, many are asking if such a blanket ban on 10-year-old diesel cars and 15-year-old petrol cars actually makes any sense. Or should it be on a case-by-case basis where there are, you know, tens of lakhs of such 10-year-old diesel cars and 15-year-old petrol cars, which may be fit to ply. So should there be a fitness certificate for these cars on a case-by-case basis before these old vehicles and their fitness and their health is assessed before having this kind of a blanket ban on all 10-year plus diesel cars and all 15-year plus petrol cars? So yesterday, July 1, was the first day of this rather bold no fuel for end-of-life vehicles policy. It saw enforcement. At least 80 vehicles were impounded as part of this on day one. 12 of them happened to be four-wheelers, 67 two-wheelers, and one three-wheeler, which I believe was an auto rickshaw, was also part of the impounding exercise. So about 80 vehicles were impounded yesterday. Today we don't have the full figures, but it will be in that same ballpark between about 80 to 100. But what is actually happening on the ground at fuel stations across the national capital and the wider NCR region? Now, public announcements are being made through loudspeakers and PA systems that if your vehicle has reached end of life and if it arrives and fuel is denied, then the vehicle happens to be impounded on the spot. There is no redressal mechanism. It's not like you can go to the traffic cops. It's not like you have a traffic court that you can go and challenge the decision. It's going to be impounded on the spot. So to implement the ban, there are more than 350 teams from various departments, the transport department, other departments who've been stationed 24/7 across almost 500 petrol pumps in the national capital. CNN News 18 took stock at one such fuel station as to what people are saying about this end-of-life vehicles.
Diesel vehicles over 10-year-old and petrol vehicles over 15-year-old will not be allowed to refuel in Delhi. A total of 350 petrol stations have been identified for policy enforcement and potential vehicle seizures. Not just that the petrol will be denied, but also the vehicles will be impounded if they are found to have been violating the life of the vehicle. This move was initiated by the Commission for Air Quality Management in collaboration with Transport Department, Delhi Police and traffic personnel in a bid to curb air pollution in national capital. You can see a board here at this petrol pump that clearly mentions that fuel will not be dispensed to end-of-life vehicles. We also have Anil Prasad ji, who's the supervisor of this petrol pump. Sir, क्या directions हैं government से जो vehicles आएंगे उनको आप लोग पेट्रोल और डीजल देने के लिए मना किया गया है?
जी हाँ सर, दिल्ली गवर्नमेंट ने हमें जो है एक जो लागू कर रखा है यहाँ पे, और हमें जो है सर्कुलर दे रखा है कि जो भी पेट्रोल और सीएनजी की गाड़ियाँ हैं 15 साल पुरानी होंगी उन्हें जो है कोई भी ईंधन और गैस नहीं मिलेगा, और जो डीजल की गाड़ियाँ 10 साल पुरानी होंगी उन्हें जो है डीजल नहीं दिया जाएगा.
So I want to go across to Mr. Vinkesh Gulati. He's Vice President of the Automotive Skill Development Council. Thanks very much, Mr. Gulati. So this decision is almost blanket ban of denying diesel to 10-year-old cars and petrol to 15-year-old cars. And on the first day, about 80-odd cars and other two-wheelers and three-wheelers were impounded. Many are saying that, you know, having this kind of a blanket ban on all of these cars, that's not going to work. There are very old diesel cars but are still fit to ply, similar to petrol cars, more than 15-year-old and still fit to ply. Should there be a little more nuance in this new law, or should it be a blanket ban like what we're seeing?
See, frankly speaking, this rule is nothing new. It has been implemented before, and it's actually not even a Delhi government rule. This was implemented by the CDAC, which is the air quality regulatory body. So it has been there since long time, but the implementation hasn't been that strong. What this new Delhi government of BJP is wanting to do it. Even before, anything more than 10-year diesel was not allowed to ply in Delhi NCR. Vehicles were challaned if they were moving on the road. More than 15-year petrol wasn't allowed. And we parallelly, MORTH came with a policy of where the fitness can be done and then the vehicle can be driven more. But seeing the Delhi pollution issue and the Supreme Court and this body being involved, not much the government could do it. Now what Delhi new BJP government is doing is just implementing it in a proper way, or you can say enforcement is being happening in the senior way. And what has happened, not even today, for the past around 6 months to a year, the vehicles which are stranded outside, which doesn't come into 10-year petrol and 15-year diesel, are being scouted and being picked up by these scrap dealers as per the policy. So yes, they have come hard on implementing this policy. It's on one side, seeing the Delhi pollution, which normally happens in the winters, it's a good policy. But overall, if you see from the human side, it's not that great a policy, because normally there are customers who even don't drive more than 5,000 per year.
That's correct.
And a vehicle driven which is 30,000 or 50,000 in 10 years doesn't need to be impounded. They have their right, because officially they have paid the 15-year road tax when they have bought this vehicle.
Correct.
But you know, when the Supreme Court or Supreme Court authoritative body, when it comes in, it becomes difficult where such public issues or even things can be sorted out.
But Mr. Gulati, you know, the question is there a better way to do this? I mean, in the West, in America or the UK, for example, cars run easily for 20 years, 25 years, sometimes even 30 years. Is it possible in the case of India, and this is obviously this applies to the National Capital Region, to let's say have for petrol cars and diesel cars, which have gone past this 15-year and 10-year deadline, every year the car goes to the RTO or goes to a pollution control center and says, okay, it gets a fitness certificate for 1 year that this car is fit to run on the road, this car is fit to ply. Isn't that a better way to do it than just say blanket ban on all 10-year-old diesel and 15-year-old petrol cars?
Yeah, that's a better. So what I'm told you, there are a lot of vehicles who haven't even done 10,000, 15,000 or 20,000 also.
Correct.
Because the people who bought for their emergency or for some time moving around with the family, they don't use it. They use public transport for that. And the vehicles are in spick and span good conditions. And normally Indian, all of us, we are very emotional with our vehicles. So we take them as a family member and we maintain them properly also. I'm not talking about the 10-20% of the people who don't bother, but most of us, when we buy a vehicle, we are emotionally attached. We don't let it sell after 10 years because we still think that it's good enough. And frankly, even today's 10-year-old petrol vehicle in Delhi, you will see many vehicles which are better than 3-year-old petrol vehicles today because it's not been maintained. And government does as a policy. MORTH has a policy where after 8 years or 10 years, you can get yearly fitness test from the that automatic fitness test machine infrastructure what they have created. And from there, so there is 30-40 kilometers out of Delhi also, there is a center which does that. But the problem, like I said, this is what should be. It is not that the year ban should be or kilometer ban should be. It should be the quality of vehicle and the quality of exhaust emission it gives. Even in a 3-year or 4-year-old BS6 vehicle, if not maintained well, will give you more exhaust fumes than a 10-year vehicle, petrol or a diesel vehicle, if it is maintained and regularly tuned at an authorized dealer.
Mr. Gulati, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, Vinkesh Gulati there. Expressing what I think is the common sense sentiment amongst a lot of Delhiites and folks in the NCR region, that this kind of blanket ban of not providing fuel to 10-year-old diesel cars and 15-year-old petrol cars just doesn't make any sense. There's surely a better, more nuanced way to do this. Meanwhile, foreign ministers of the Quad countries, that's the United States, India, Japan and Australia, issued a joint statement condemning the April 22nd terrorist attack in Pahalgam. The condemnation has arrived in the strongest possible terms. It firmly pitches for action against cross-border terrorism, the financiers, the backers, the sponsors of terror. The foreign ministers of 4 countries, urged that those who are behind this act be brought to justice. In fact, foreign ministers of the Quad countries also urged all UN member states, in accordance with their obligations, to cooperate actively with all relevant authorities to ensure justice for the victims of this attack. Now, why this statement is significant is because just last week, China and Pakistan had blocked India's bid to call out the Pahalgam terror attack and the perpetrators of the attack in the SCO joint statement, so much so that India refused to go along and refused to sign the joint statement. There was no explicit terror reference at the SCO meet or in the SCO joint statement. As a result, India refused to sign this Pakistan-China agenda at the SCO summit. At the Quad summit, it was completely the opposite story. India did raise the Pahalgam terror attack issue. Others joined in the condemnation as well, and in explicit language, it was mentioned in the joint statement at the end of the meeting. At the SCO, while Pakistan and China colluded to block any reference to the terror attack in Pahalgam, the Quad, on the other hand, emphasized on cross-border terrorism and its implications for democracies. The SCO statement mentioned regional security. It was a very bland sort of phrase, whereas the Quad is called to go to the root cause of the problem and it be rooted out. It called for perpetrators and financiers of terror to be gone after. The SCO was divided. The terrorism issue, the definition of terrorism, was politicized. That wasn't the case at the Quad, as it stood united, it stood strong and aligned on the issue of terror.
A word about terrorism in the light of our recent experience. The world must display zero tolerance. Victims and perpetrators must never be equated, and India has every right to defend its people against terrorism, and we will exercise that right. We expect our Quad partners to understand and appreciate that.
America's bombing of Iran's key nuclear sites in Fordo, Isfahan and Natanz has seriously and heavily damaged almost all of those facilities. This has been confirmed by the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi himself, despite some initial intel reports, including from the Defense Intelligence Agency in the United States, downplaying the extent of damage. But the bigger picture and the bigger question that needs to be asked is, how far back has Iran's nuclear program been pushed?
Tonight I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated.
So over the weekend, President Trump declared that Iran's nuclear capabilities were completely and totally obliterated by the American airstrikes. The full extent of the damage, which is being assessed by U.S. intelligence agencies, is still unclear. Several disclosures and claims by the United States and United Nations officials, along with satellite images taken after the Israeli and American airstrikes, have shed some light on the situation in Iran, in particular at its major nuclear sites. A leaked U.S. intelligence report said that attacks set back Iran's nuclear program by only a few months. That's a finding that's been disputed by the White House and, in particular, by President Trump. Both the New York Times and CNN reported the same over the last week, much to the chagrin of Trump personally. That preliminary classified report said that the American bombing of the 3 nuclear sites in Iran set back that country's nuclear program only by a few months. The report was put together by the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA, in which it is estimated that the Iranian nuclear program had been delayed by less than 6 months because of these strikes. Trump, of course, disputes that claim made by his own intel folks. Instead, he's lashed out at the media.
What intelligence do you have that Iran is building a nuclear weapon? Your intelligence community has said they have no evidence that they are at this point.
Well, then my intelligence community is wrong. Who in the intelligence community said that?
Your Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard.
She's wrong.
The CIA Director John Ratcliffe said last week that the strikes had severely damaged Iran's nuclear program, although he did not exactly outline what he means by severely damaged. Rafael Grossi, who is the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, has said that the centrifuges at the deeply buried Fordo enrichment site are no longer operational. But he also added a word of caution. He said it would be too much to assert that Iran's nuclear program has been totally wiped out. Iran built the Fordo fuel enrichment plant deep inside a mountain. It is impervious to any attack except the one that we saw last Sunday, which was a repeated assault by American bunker buster bombs. In fact, an American official has confirmed that at least 6 B-2 bombers, which flew all the way from Missouri in the US, flew 37 hours and then ended up dropping about a dozen 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs on Fordo last Sunday. The Fordo site contained thousands of Iran's most advanced centrifuges, which are meant to enrich uranium. These enriched uranium centrifuges are the ones that are critical to making a nuclear weapon. In 2023, the IAEA had back then estimated that it had discovered uranium which had been enriched to more than 80% purity at the Fordo enrichment plant, just under the 90% that is required to make a nuclear weapon. Satellite images which were captured shortly after the American airstrikes reveal significant damage as well as the likely entry points for these bunker buster bombs. The images show distinct changes in the appearance of the ground. Also, you can see significant grey dust near the possible strike locations. The bunker busters have to penetrate the earth and they will only explode after traveling several hundred feet inside the ground. The UN nuclear watchdog has said that given the power of these bombs, 30,000 pounds is what they weigh, that were dropped on Fordo, the assessment by the IAEA is that these centrifuges may no longer be operational. The spinning centrifuges, that's the mechanism of these high-speed centrifuges which are required to make a nuclear weapon or to enrich uranium to the level required to make a nuclear weapon. That spinning mechanism requires a high degree of precision. These are vulnerable to intense vibrations. So if you have a 30,000 pound that's dropped deep inside, several hundred feet inside the earth, and then that leads to an explosion, it's likely that it would have affected the spinning centrifuge. Natanz, which is the site of Iran's largest uranium enrichment program, that was damaged by multiple Israeli strikes, along with an American attack that appears to have targeted the underground enrichment halls of Natanz. The IAEA says that it had identified direct impacts on the underground enrichment halls at Natanz after Israel targeted the facility with missiles first. It also said that the attack had destroyed the overground part of the fuel enrichment plant. Unlike in Fordo, in Natanz, the facilities are buried just a few meters deep. Satellite images show that 2 craters were seen over the suspected locations of those facilities. A US Navy submarine fired more than 24 cruise missiles at a third site, which is called Isfahan, which had also been attacked by the Israeli military. That site was thought to house the enriched uranium along with facilities that are meant to process uranium ore and then turn uranium gas into a solid form. Only after it reaches solid form can it be potentially made into a weapon. But how much has Iran's program actually been set back by? And can Iran still build a nuclear weapon despite these massive attacks by America and Israel? Iran has a long history of building covert underground nuclear sites. There are anywhere between a dozen to 24 sites across the length and the breadth of this country. This month, Iranian officials had claimed that the country had another enrichment site in a secure and previously undisclosed location. They claim it's not a location that is vulnerable like Fordo or Natanz. Experts believe that this new site could be close to Natanz. It's under the hills called the Ku'a Kolang Gazla. It's a mountain range nearly a mile above sea level. That means it could be buried twice as deep as Fordo. Senior American officials have also conceded that they do not know with certainty the fate of Iran's stockpile of the uranium. Before the American airstrikes, there was evidence that the Iranians who were tuned in to what President Trump had been repeatedly saying, these threats of attacking and taking military action against these nuclear sites, there is word that the Iranians had removed up to 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity from Isfahan. The Defense Intelligence Agency's report also said that much of Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium was moved much before the strikes, which destroyed little of the nuclear material that had already been enriched. Iran may have moved some of that to secret locations, one of which may now be coming to light. Some Israeli officials also conceded that they believed that the Iranian government had maintained small covert enrichment facilities so that they could easily transfer the nuclear program in the event of an attack. It is not clear whether the Iranians will still try to rebuild the program, the nuclear program that is. The sad truth is that by striking Iran, the United States and Israel has made it much more likely that Iran will want to now obtain a nuclear weapon. Even if these strikes knocked out all of Iran's nuclear facilities, Iran will now be much more motivated than ever before, perhaps, to rebuild its nuclear capacities and pursue not just uranium enrichment, but actual weapons grade so that it can make a nuclear weapon. The future of Iran's nuclear program will depend on a multiplicity of factors. One, the extent of the damage left behind. Two, how many of Iran's secret nuclear sites are still functional, are still active. And three, Tehran's negotiating position in the coming days. But one thing is as clear as daylight, that just like in the case of Ukraine, had Iran possessed a nuclear weapon already before these attacks by America and Israel, the nature and magnitude of the American and Israeli action would have been much more restrained. And to that extent, nuclear weapon still remains not just the great deterrent, but also the great equalizer. All right, so the question is, the 12-day Israel-Iran war has ended. There's been a ceasefire. All sides are claiming victory. Israel is, Iran is, certainly the United States and President Donald Trump are. How has this changed the sort of dynamic of the region as we know it over the last many decades? Are we now moving towards a conclusion of these various wars that we're seeing in the Middle East? It started off in the aftermath of October 7th, 2023, when Israel launched this war on Hamas. Then it spread to southern Lebanon, the war against Hezbollah and the Houthis in the Red Sea and elsewhere, and finally culminating in this 12-day Iran-Israel war. Joining us now is Professor Emeritus of War Studies at King's College London, Sir Lawrence Freedman. Thank you very much, Dr. Freedman, for speaking with us. So President Trump calls it the 12-day war. From your vantage, the way you saw events play out and the war play out between Israel and Iran, and now that it's been a week since it concluded, what is your assessment of what has been achieved in these 12 days? Is it a complete reset in the Middle East as we know it, or is it just a work in progress?
It's a culmination of a lot of trends. Which have been going on, you could argue, since the Iranian Revolution at the start of 1979, when the new clerical regime established itself as opponents of both the United States and Israel. So it's not new, and it may not yet be over, but what has changed, and I think this is not just the last 12 days, but all that has happened since October the 7th, 23, is an axis of resistance, that's their term, that was set up by Iran has been very badly weakened. Hamas is hanging on in Gaza, but is no longer able to pose a direct military threat to Israel. Hezbollah has been severely weakened and was unable to take any part in the recent exchange of fire, despite the fact that it had almost been developed by Iran as a deterrent to the sort of thing that Israel and the US has just done. Syria, which was bolstered by Iran and Hezbollah and Russia, has now reverted to a pre-Assad time, and the US is making quite an effort to embrace it, the new Syria. And now Iran went through a big conflict with Israel with thousands of missiles and drones prepared to go, and made limited impact on Israel, while Israel had targets in Iran easily available because air defenses had been destroyed. So it's not the end, because the regime is still in place. Its rhetoric hasn't changed, and it's not even altogether clear that it no longer has much of a nuclear option, but it's certainly been severely weakened.
I do want to know, like you said, the regime is still very much there, but what about the old playbook? And this is what the Ayatollah regime, the playbook that they used were these, terror proxies, as you referred to them, as the axis of resistance. They have been weakened, certainly, but have they been weakened to the point where the old tactics no longer apply?
I think, and if they've got any sense, they'll be rethinking their foreign policy and what they're trying to achieve. And I think there are some elements in the Iranian government that realized this some time ago, which is why they were prepared to engage with the United States. It's just they felt pushed beyond a level which they could go by the American negotiations, and then Israel sort of interrupted them. So I think that there's a lobby in Iran to move in a different direction, but it's not necessarily the dominant one. And it's a question of the whole identity of the regime and its legitimacy. Now, I think there are the big questions, from my view, are how they deal with the domestic pressures building up. And many Iranians see the sort of anti-Zionist campaign as a bit of distraction from their own basic needs. The economy's in a mess. There's substantial discontent. That doesn't mean to say that the regime is on the verge of being overthrown, but there's a lot of big issues that need to be addressed. So I think one of the questions is how much they concentrate on these more domestic concerns and how much they try to revive this sort of aggressive foreign policy and the means to conduct it, which I think they'll find difficult. I mean, they may find it possible to sort of stay in the nuclear game in some way. We just don't know enough, I think, about where that capability was left.
So the feeling in Israel certainly seems to be that it could have gone the whole hog, and that is that it could have gone ahead and brought in some form of regime change, because otherwise the old playbook will still be revived by the Ayatollah regime. And somehow the feeling's also that it was President Trump who took the call and who sort of drew that red line saying, we're not interested in regime change. America doesn't want to get dragged into one of those, again, long-winded wars in the Middle East. And had it not been for that line that he drew, Israel could have actually gone and tried to change the regime of the Ayatollah. Is there any merit in such a feeling?
I think Israel wanted to go on a bit longer. I mean, certainly talked about the desirability of regime change. I don't believe they thought they could achieve it by themselves. I mean, they weakened the regime in a variety of ways, including taking out senior figures, attacking a jail, media, and so on. But I think it was always the case, and I think the Israelis understood that would depend on Iranians, not on Israel. But I think it is the case that Trump, having made his point by attacking sites, nuclear relevant sites, wanted to call it a day and didn't particularly wait for the damage assessment on Fordo in particular and other enrichment plants to see if it actually had all been successful. So he was in a hurry to bring it to a conclusion, and clearly got angry with Israel when it looked like it was trying to carry on in some way. So he brought it to an end, which is why we're in this situation while the regime is still there, still has options, but it is undoubtedly severely weakened.
But what then is the incentive now for Iran to stop the pursuit of a nuclear weapon or to stop enriching uranium, provided they do still have the capability to do that? And like I said, and like you said a moment ago, we don't quite know if they still have that ability. But if they do, what's the incentive for them to, stop pursuing the nuclear weapon? Because had this been a nuclear-enabled Iran or a nuclear weaponized Iran, this war perhaps would not have happened the way it happened. Would not have happened at all, maybe.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the Iranian view. It demonstrates why a nuclear deterrent might be quite a useful thing to have. Although one has to repeat, they've always said they're not after a nuclear weapon. It's never been wholly credible, but it's still their official view. Their problem is first, we don't know, but we have to assume that the substantial damage to their program, what might have taken a year, 6 months or whatever, will now take much longer. Secondly, they've clearly been penetrated by Israeli intelligence, and the Israelis seem to have had a pretty good idea about what was going on, and that will continue, though they've arrested a number of people. I doubt if they feel they've got all Israeli agents. So it's not going to be easy for this to be covert, and if it's not covert, then there's a problem of the Israelis or even the Americans coming back for more. So I'm sure they'll be looking at the moment at what they can do. They've got their own damage assessment to do, and they'll be trying to work out their plans. And I'm sure there'll be a lobby for putting it all together again, not least to show the limits of what the Israelis and US achieved. But I don't think it's that straightforward for them.
So what you said in a moment ago in a previous answer about the feeling in Israel was they either could have gone the whole hog, if not certainly they could have gone on for a few more days, inflicted more damage. That's a feeling that many here in India shared as well in the context of the India-Pakistan conflict that happened back in May. It went on for about 4 days. There again, the feeling was it was Trump who stopped India in its tracks. It was Trump who came in and said, I've mediated and I've declared a ceasefire. Of course, the government of India has rejected that, saying it was bilaterally negotiated and arrived at. But do you see merit in that sentiment, whether it's in Israel or in India, that they could have gone whole hog against a regime, against a state which has used terror proxies for a number of decades?
Yeah, I mean, I think all the points you make are very valid, and I think the read across to Indo-Pakistan and even to Ukraine, Russia is there. Trump's basic approach is ceasefire. I mean, because that's the quickest way to stop any fighting, and and the quickest way to claim a sort of diplomatic victory. Unfortunately, ceasefires are not a way of dealing with root causes, of actually addressing the issues that divide countries. Now, whether continued military action would have achieved that is also open to doubt. I mean, there were other things Israel could have done, but I think one of the difficulties Israel has is it's very clever when it starts wars. It never seems to have a very good idea how to stop them, and if they could carry on attacking targets for ages, and not a lot Iran could have done about it. But the end result may just have been to strengthen popular support for the regime. So I don't think there was necessarily an alternative in Israel's case. And of course, for India, in the fight over Kashmir, there was a question of just how far it wanted to go. But you're left with this difficulty that if you just keep on having ceasefires, then all you're doing is sort of suspending conflicts. You're not actually resolving them.
So can I press on that point a bit? Because, the problem, whether it's Israel or for India, is these are democracies whose citizens, innocent civilians, have been attacked. And obviously in democracies, there is pressure on government to act, and there needs to be some form of retribution against these other, for want of a better phrase, enemy states that are using these terror proxies. In the case of Iran, it's Hezbollah and Hamas and all of the other entities in the Middle East. In the case of Pakistan, it's terror groups like the Lashkar-e-Taiba and the Jaish-e-Mohammed. And democracies are, by very nature, restrained in their response, yet at the same time, they have to be seen as responding, because otherwise, there's a political cost to pay. So how do democracies like India or Israel or Britain, for that matter, deal with this problem of terrorism? Because on the other side, you have a bunch of guys who are, ideologically brainwashed and who have seemingly a lot of resources, and there are states that are backing them because it suits this asymmetric warfare, suits those states.
So I think that there's two answers to that, neither satisfactory. One of them is you have to manage these crises. You have to accept that you're facing a long-term problem with groups that have backing, can cause terror, but not necessarily can go much beyond that. The UK has faced the IRA in the past, and it's faced its own Islamist terror groups in the past, and so on. So we're all familiar with that sort of challenge. And then there's the sort of root causes issue. Are there deals that could be done over Kashmir or over Palestine or whatever that would take the edge off these conflicts? And there may be, my suspicion is it's actually probably easier to do over Palestine than it is over Kashmir. But however easy it is, we're not particularly close to it at the moment. And then you're not sure. And the Israeli argument would be that all you would do with a Palestinian state is to create a base for yet more terrorism in the future. Now, these issues may be resolvable, but that's the way it goes. And I think it's just a reflection. But both of the conflicts we're talking about, go back to the end of the British Empire and the late 1940s. So we've been living with them for a very long time, and they're both appear to be zero sum. The one gains, the other loses, and that makes it much harder. So we're ending up with this sort of messy attempt to manage it, and part of the managing is to demonstrate to those causing you harm that you can cope, that you're resilient, but also that you can really hurt them in response.
You talked about deterrence in one of the previous answers in the context of states that have nuclear weapons. So, for example, India and Pakistan both have nuclear weapons. So there's a degree of deterrence that has been established. In the case of Iran and Israel, one has, but has not publicly declared. The other is in the pursuit of, hasn't achieved that yet. And therefore, that's a little different. But how do you achieve deterrence in the case of terrorism? What is the deterrence in the case of terrorism? Because, like I said, those guys are brainwashed and ready to die.
The only deterrence, the deterrence is often spoken of in two ways. One is punishment. If you do these horrible things, we will punish you badly, which doesn't always seem to work. And the other is denial. You may try to do these terrible things, but we're really going to stop you getting away with it, which is about better intelligence, better protection of public areas, and being prepared to act when you see a problem developing. And if you look at the attack of the 7th of October 23, it could have been prevented. The Israelis had the intelligence; they weren't acting upon it. Now, I don't know enough about the situation in Kashmir, I don't think there's. I'm afraid that the unsatisfactory answer is there's no obvious solution, but you can make it harder. And we've seen in the past groups, in a sense, peter out because they can't recruit. They don't get. They've got to sustain themselves, and if they can't show successful activity, then people don't join them, and so on. But it's a long haul. There's no simple answer to it.
So is there any lessons? There have been terror groups that have been defeated in the last 20 years. Al-Qaeda is an example of it. IS, the Islamic State, in its various forms, some of it has been defeated quite successfully. Are there lessons that can be learned from those examples, whether it's Israel in the context of Hamas, Hezbollah, etc., or even India in the context of these terror groups?
I think that the thing about Hamas and Hezbollah, and of course ISIS as well, was that they ended up moving from sort of terrorist militias into fully fledged armies. and that made it much easier to hit them. I mean, if you're just talking about a few individuals who move amongst the shadows and come out and do their deeds, it's actually much harder to wipe them out completely. If they act as if they're fully fledged armies representing a state, then it's easier actually to use regular force against them, which is why in the end Hamas, Hezbollah and ISIS in practice have all been defeated as regular forces. But the ideology and the incentives for individuals to carry on the fight, as it were, remain. So again, it's almost easier the more they come out into the open and present themselves as a regular force, organized in battalions and so on.
All right. One final word, and this is a slightly larger question, a more strategic 20, 30-year question, which is, the big great power competition that's going to define the coming few decades is going to be between America and China. I mean, many are calling it the new Cold War, etc. And there is also the view that all of these conflicts, whether it's Ukraine, Russia, Israel, Iran, India, Pakistan, is actually taking away the free world, the liberal worlds, and the current established global world orders, attention, resources, money, and time away from that big competition, which is how do you deal with this question of a rising and a hegemonic China?
Yes, I mean that's certainly a strongly held view among some in the Trump administration, and why they want ceasefires everywhere is they just want everything to concentrate on dealing with China. Though I think in Trump's view, dealing with China is more an economic matter than a military matter, and which is why all the tariff issues I think are in some ways more important, and in fact may end up having more consequences for the international system than some of the military activity. And I think part of it is trying to read what China's about. I mean, I don't think particularly China is hegemonic globally. It's certainly regionally. And
let's say if it were to attack Taiwan, how would that?
Yeah, I mean, Taiwan's the example everybody gives, but you also got the South China Sea and so on. And we spend a lot of time trying to read American intentions and interests in all of this, and you rarely come out with a sense that the Americans would go whole hog for Taiwan. They might, and
will they even under Trump?
It's not clear. I mean, Trump doesn't particularly. I mean, the main interest that Trump sees and other Americans see in Taiwan is the microchip industry, and beyond that, not a lot. So I think there's a lot of uncertainties in this. Where undoubtedly there's big competition between the US and China in all sorts of ways, but it's become a much more complicated competition. Unlike that between the US and the Soviet Union in the old days. The Soviet Union was unimportant to the international economy. China is incredibly important to the international economy. And that's why I think it's in the end, this is a conflict that will be fought out more in that sphere than in the military sphere. Although if it is ever fought out in the military sphere, we really do have a problem.
All right. Sir Lawrence Freedman, thank you so much for joining us for this fascinating conversation. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Good to talk to you.
Co-presented. This is News 18 Network. India's largest news network.
The Dalai Lama, who remember in some days from now will be turning 90, and he has made a very important announcement as he is in McLeodganj. He has announced that he will have his successor after his death. He says that the foundation of the Dalai Lama will elect his successor. And remember, this is also rooted in the traditional Buddhist Tibetan customs, because that's when a successor is chosen of the Dalai Lama only after his passing. Siddhant joins me to put this into perspective. Siddhant, take us through what is the larger message behind this announcement by the Dalai Lama, and what does it mean for China?
Well, Akanksha, as per what Manoj Gupta is reporting for us, then Dalai Lama's speech decimates plans of China imposing their own man, Pancham Lama. In fact, Dalai Lama made it very clear that my succession will be after me by the trust. Dalai Lama has taken a decisive step to anchor his succession in Tibetan spiritual authority. In fact, Dalai Lama has clearly said continuation of the institution of the Dalai Lama will work on his succession. No external actor or political or religion can interfere. The process will involve consultations with the high Tibetan lamas and reference to dharma protectors, reject any claim by China or unauthorized actors and its continuity with a pan-Buddhist exile-led spiritual framework. Now, top intel sources are telling this to Manoj Gupta that this statement neutralizes Beijing's narrative that the Dalai Lama's role is outdated or that his successor can be controlled through state machinery. It creates a shield around his reincarnation rooted in tradition and institutional legitimacy.
Stay with me, Siddhant. In fact, those are breaking inputs that we are bringing to our viewers, shared by Security Affairs Editor Mr. Manoj Gupta, referring to the Dalai Lama's speech and that big announcement coming in. What is the larger context? Well, it certainly decimates China's plans, imposing their own Pancham Lama. Top intelligence sources revealing to CNN News 18 that this statement neutralizes Beijing's narrative that the Dalai Lama's role is outdated or that his successor can be controlled through any kind of state machinery. I quickly go back to Siddhant, who will put this into perspective for us. Siddhant, important to also highlight why China was looking towards this big announcement, and does China even have the right to interfere in Dalai Lama's succession, given that it's traditionally rooted in the Tibetan Buddhist custom?
Well, China's position perhaps has been very clear as far as the succession of Dalai Lama is concerned, and this is exactly what Manoj Gupta is reporting, that Dalai Lama's speech decimates plans of China imposing their own Pancham Lama. In fact, China has also been trying to send this message out to the world that how they have preserved the rich Buddhist Tibetan heritage and the monasteries and the places of Tibetan culture in the whole of Tibet, and China also always wanted to send this message out that how China can take care of the Buddhist community, the traditional Tibetan community living in China. Having said that, now top intel sources are telling this to Manoj Gupta, Akanksha, that this statement by the Dalai Lama today neutralizes Beijing's narrative that the Dalai Lama's role is outdated or that his successor can be controlled through state machinery. Manoj Gupta also says in his report that it creates a shield around his reincarnation, rooted in tradition and institutional legitimacy, making any future Chinese appointed Dalai Lama appear inauthentic. Manoj also has to say that the inclusion of consultations with Mongolian, Russian, Himalayan and Chinese Buddhist communities internationalizes the selection process and signals broad legitimacy beyond India or Dharamshala.
Right.
Operationally, it empowers the exile apparatus, Gaiden, Hodrang and plus CTA to begin preparing succession mechanisms discreetly before his passing. So Manoj's report has to say that the succession process of the Dalai Lama will begin after this particular televised statement which he has made, and perhaps making it very clear that it's going to be the office of His Holiness Dalai Lama which will be choosing his successor, the reincarnation of His Holiness Dalai Lama.
Interestingly, Siddhant, that's also in conjunction with what the United States has been calling for. Remember, US lawmakers last year had passed a Tibet Dispute Act, which categorically stated that they will not recognize any...
Viewers, let's get straight to the point tonight. What would you call a group of political parties who oppose citizenship for Hindus persecuted in neighboring Islamic countries but support asylum for Rohingya Muslims? What would you call a group of parties who deem Hindu festivals as environmentally unfriendly while ignoring similar concerns over festivals of other communities? What would you call a group of parties that liken Sanatan Dharma to a disease? Would you call them tolerant, inclusive, pluralistic, secular? Viewers, not if the hard facts have anything to do with it. The India Alliance is severely critical of the RSS and the BJP for demanding that the word secular should be expunged from the constitution. But does the same India Alliance practice secularism? That's the baseline question. And if it did practice secularism, would it have a problem with Hindus wanting to protect the sanctity of their religious festivals? Would it link any such efforts by the Hindu community to protect the sanctity of its festivals to religious exceptionalism? The answer is no, viewers. So then why are its leaders liking a proposal by 3 state governments to the bigotry linked to Pahalgam and divisiveness? Sample this from Congress Party's Digvijay Singh and also Samajwadi Party's Hassan, viewers, who are linking the Kavar Yatra, no less, to terrorism of the kind, the religious terrorism of the kind we saw in Pahalgam. Listen to this, viewers. Listen to this.
राज्य सरकार अगर कांवड़ यात्रा के लिए सुविधा प्रदान करती है तो उसमें कोई आपत्ति नहीं है, लेकिन दूसरी बात यह है कि कांवड़ यात्रा के माध्यम से आप एक नफरत का माहौल पैदा करें समाज में, वो उचित नहीं है।
जो हिंदू मुसलमान करके यहाँ की आबादी को बांटना चाहते हैं और आबादी बढ़ने के बाद देश कमजोर हो, किसने ये राइट दिया इनको कि ढाबों की चेकिंग करें? ये किसने इनको ये राइट दिया कि लोगों की पैंटें उतरवाएं? क्या इनमें और उन आतंकवादियों में कोई फर्क है जिन्होंने धर्म पूछ के पहलगाम के अंदर गोलियां मारी थी? ये भी एक तरह के आतंकवादी हैं और वो भी आतंकवादी थे।
Because if the India Alliance was truly secular, would it flaunt its political alliance with Islamists? Here you can see Congress senior Kerala leader Anto Antony, viewers, embracing the workers of NIA-designated terror group PFI's political arm, the SDPI. There it is, viewers. Congress MP Anto Antony in his constituency. The Congress MP met with these SDPI workers in Kerala. The Congress MP Anto Antony justified meeting them, saying that they were well-wishing constituents, viewers. That's the state of affairs. An act that has led the BJP to accuse India Alliance leading like the Congress of practicing namazwad. Listen into this, viewers. Right? Check.
वो सेक्युलरिज्म के अगेंस्ट हैं, डेमोक्रेसी के अगेंस्ट हैं। ये उनके ही कहे हुए वर्ड्स में आपको सुना रहा हूँ, और ये इस्लामिक गवर्नेंस में मानते हैं। इस ऑर्गेनाइजेशन का नाम है जमाते इस्लामी। बहुत सालों तक देश के मेन स्ट्रीम राजनीति में और पॉलिटिक्स से बाहर रखा गया था, क्योंकि जैसे मैंने कहा, कांग्रेस के लोग भी इसको एक डेंजरस ऑर्गेनाइजेशन मानते थे। लेकिन पहली बार राहुल गांधी के पुराने कॉन्स्टिट्यूएंसी और प्रियंका गांधी के आज की कॉन्स्टिट्यूएंसी वायनाड में जो निलंबूर बाई इलेक्शन हुआ, उसमें पहली बार कांग्रेस ने खुल के फॉर्मली जमाते इस्लामी के सपोर्ट उन्होंने लिया, प्रचार हुआ।
Viewers, why would any secular nationalist political platform invite Medha Patkar and Prakash Raj to Parliament to attend a meeting of a parliamentary standing committee, knowing fully well that these individuals have been apologists for Pakistan's Islamist terrorism? Congress MP was the chair of Parliament Standing Committee on Rural Development, and he invited Medha Patkar and Prakash Raj. Medha Patkar is on record objecting to any diplomatic effort to link Pakistan to Islamist terror. Can you believe it, viewers? She says you should not call Pakistan a terror state. Prakash Raj, the actor turned activist, so-called activist, has vehemently opposed calls for boycotting Pakistan stars who have been selectively silent on Pak-sponsored Islamist terror. He has a problem with that. He wants dialogue with Pakistan. If this wasn't enough, the entire India Alliance has shared a platform with a sectarian organization called the Jamaat-e-Sharia in Patna's iconic Gandhi Maidan just a few days ago. And you can see those pictures. Every leader of the India Alliance was there. This duplicity at multiple levels expresses the India Alliance brand of secularism, one that routinely marginalizes Hindus under the guise of progressive politics, viewers. And it begs us to ask some straight and direct and honest questions. And I want to open this up and go straight across to Nikhil Jain, political analyst, Syed Asad Abbas also, who believes that the India bloc, the India Alliance, is upholding the secular character of our constitution. So let me ask you straight off the bat, Mr. Jain, and this is what I've shown you a large number of instances now. So the Congress and the India bloc, they swear by the word secular in the preamble. They say any effort to expunge it is communalist. But these examples seem to suggest, and I'm asking you a question, is the India Namazwadi, however, in practice? Straight question.
See, Rahul, first of all, I'm having a little difficulty understanding what really is the question here. But so far as you questioning the credentials of the India bloc and their secularism is concerned, first and foremost, let me point it out to your viewers that BJP is a party in whose constitution, in the preamble of their constitution, they also have the word secular and socialist. Sanju is sitting here, she can very well pull it out. So far as the word secular and socialist in being included in the constitution by is concerned, Supreme Court has given a patina of judgments saying that this is not in sync with the constitution, and the principles of secularism and socialism are part of the basic structure. I'm not having a legal debate,
sir. You're hardly qualified to have a legal debate. So I'm asking you, Mr. Jain, very seriously and very straightforwardly. One second. I'm asking you, why does... hang on. Why does the Congress selectively attack Hindu festivals? I'm asking you a question. Simple, please. Why does the India Alliance... Okay, fine, sir. Fair enough. You are a very learned constitutional lawyer. Okay, I rest my case. But let me ask you the pertinent questions tonight. I'm not getting into a larger philosophical debate that should be held actually by a constitutional bench of India. I'm